Hello again. We're back on Landmark Thucydides about the Peloponnesian War. Last time I left off on paragraph 1.27. So, where were we? The Epidamnians requested aid. They were ignored by Corcyra, but they received help from Corinth and other Hellenic nations who wanted to help them, and so they sent triremes and hoplites. The Corcyraeans apparently did not like that, and so they sent forces. And some words were exchanged. Nobody was really listening to anybody. But the Epidamnians' problem hasn't gone away, and so we may be on the way towards that fabled war Thucydides had been setting us up for. So I'm going to jump right in. I'm going to start with paragraph 1.28. We're going to see what happens with these folks. And of course, I've got a feeling that things don't get better. But let's see what happens. 1.28. When the Corcyraeans heard of their preparations, they came to Corinth with envoys from Sparta and Sicyon, whom they persuaded to accompany them and bade her recall the garrison and settlers, as she had nothing to do with Epidamnus. If, however, she had any claims to make, they were willing to submit the matter to the arbitration of such of the cities in the Peloponnesus as should be chosen by mutual agreement, and to accept that the colony should remain with the city to whom the arbitrators might assign it. They were also willing to refer the matter to the oracle at Delphi, if, in defiance of their protestations, war was resorted to. They should be themselves compelled by this violence to seek friends in quarters where they had no desire to seek them, and to make even old ties give way to the necessity of assistance. The answer they got from Corinth was that if they would withdraw their fleet into barbarians from Epidamnus, negotiation might be possible. But while the city was still being besieged, going before arbitrators was out of the question. The Corcyraeans retorted that if Corinth would withdraw her troops from Epidamnus, they would withdraw theirs. Or they were ready to let both parties remain where they were, an armistice being concluded till judgment could be given. All right, everybody's got the troops out, and now we're talking. Again, uh, hmm, we'll see. 1.29. Turning a deaf ear to all these proposals, that didn't take long. When their ships were manned and their allies had come in, the Corinthians sent a herald before them to declare war. Okay? And getting under way with 75 ships and 2,000 hoplites sailed for Epidamnus to give battle to the Corcyraeans. Right. The fleet was under the command of Aristeus, son of Pelecus, Callicrates, son of Callias, and Timanor, son of Timanthes. The troops under that of Archetimus, son of Eurytimus, and Isarchidas, son of Asarchus. When the Gulf of Ambracia, where the temple of Apollo stands, the Corcyraeans sent on a herald in a light boat to warn them not to sail against them. Meanwhile, they proceeded to man their ships. All of them had been equipped for action, the old vessels being tightened to make them seaworthy. On the return of the herald, without any peaceful answer from the Corinthians, their ships being, yeah, it wasn't a peaceful response, yeah, at all. Their ships being now manned, they put out to sea to meet the enemy with a fleet of 80 sail. In parentheses, as 40 were engaged in the siege of Epidamnus, formed line and went into action and gained a decisive victory, and destroyed 15 of the Corinthian vessels. The same day that had seen Epidamnus compelled by its besiegers to capitulate, the conditions being that the foreigners should be sold and the Corinthians kept as prisoners of war till their fate should be otherwise decided. All right, well, uh, so much for that. Um, they tried to talk, but the Corinthians dropped the bomb of war. They dropped the war, the W word, and okay, everybody's in. So here we go. 1.30. After the engagement, the Corcyraeans set up a trophy on Leukimme, a headland of Corcyra, and slew all their captives except the Corinthians, whom they kept as prisoners of war. Defeated at sea, the Corinthians and their allies returned home and left the Corcyraeans masters of all the sea about those parts. Sailing to Leucas, a Corinthian colony, they ravaged their territory and burnt Callene, the harbor of the Eleans, because they had furnished ships and money to Corinth. Okay. For almost the whole of the period that followed the battle, they remained masters of the sea, and the allies of Corinth were harassed by Corcyraean vessels. At last, Corinth, roused by the sufferings of her allies, sent out ships and troops in the fall of the summer, who formed an encampment at Actium and about Camarium in Thesprotis, for the protection of Lucas and the rest of the friendly cities. The Corcyraeans, for their part, formed a similar station on Leukimae. Neither party made any movement, but they remained confronting each other till the end of the summer, and winter was at hand before either of them returned home. So the proverbial trenches have been dug, to use, I guess, a more modern phrase. 1.31. Corinth, exasperated by the war with the Corcyraeans, spent the whole of the year after the engagement and that succeeding it in building ships, and in straining every nerve to form an efficient fleet, rowers being drawn from the Peloponnesus and the rest of Hellas by the inducement of large bounties. The Corcyraeans, alarmed at the news of their preparations, being without a single ally in Hellas, in parentheses it says, for they had not enrolled themselves either in the Athenian or in the Spartan confederacy, decided to appeal to Athens in order to enter into alliance and to endeavor to procure support from her. Corinth also, hearing of their intentions, sent an embassy to Athens to prevent the Corcyraean navy being joined by the Athenian, and her prospect of ordering the war according to her wishes being thus impeded. An assembly was convoked, and the rival advocates appeared. The Corcyraeans spoke as follows: Athenians, when a people that have not rendered any important service or support to their neighbors in times past, for which they might claim to be repaid, appear before them as we now appear before you to solicit their assistance, they may fairly be required to satisfy certain preliminary conditions. They should show, first, that it is expedient, or at least safe, to grant their request. Next, that they will retain a lasting sense of the kindness. But if they cannot clearly establish any of these points, they must not be annoyed if they meet with a rebuff. Now the Corcyraeans believe that with their petition for assistance that they can also give you a satisfactory answer on these points, and they have therefore dispatched us hither. It has so happened that our policy as regards you, with respect to this request, turns out to be inconsistent, and as regards our interest to be at the present crisis inexpedient. We say inconsistent because a power which has never in the whole of her past history been willing to ally herself with any of her neighbors is now found asking them to ally themselves with her. And we say inexpedient because in our present war with Corinth, it has left us in a position of entire isolation, and what once seemed the wise precaution of refusing to involve ourselves in alliances with other powers, lest we should also involve ourselves in risk of their choosing, has now proved to be folly and weakness. It is true that in the late naval engagement we drove back the Corinthians from our shores single-handed, but they have now got together a still larger armament from the Peloponnesus and the rest of Hellas, and we, seeing our utter inability to cope with them without foreign aid and the magnitude of the danger which subjection to them implies, find it necessary to ask help from you and from every other power, and we hope to be excused if we forswear our old principle of complete political isolation, a principle which was not adopted without any sinister intention, but was rather the consequence of an error of judgment. I wonder, so the Corcyraeans proved in the first battle to be dominant, and they're technically the sea power in the region right now. But makes you wonder. I guess they felt like they just couldn't hold that up for long, maybe. Um, who knows? Okay. But this speech continues on. So 1.33. Now there are many reasons why, in the event of your compliance, you will congratulate yourselves on this request having been made to you. First, because your assistance will be rendered to a power which, herself inoffensive, is a victim to the injustice of others. Secondly, because all that we most value is at stake in the present contest, and by according to our request under these circumstances, you will give unforgettable proof of your goodwill and create in us a lasting sense of gratitude. Thirdly, yourselves excepted, we are the greatest naval power in Hellas. Can you conceive a stroke of good fortune more rare in itself, or more disheartening to your enemies, than that the power whose adhesion you would have valued above much material and moral strength should present herself self-invited, should deliver herself into your hands without danger and without expense, and should lastly put you in the way of gaining a high character in the eyes of the world, the gratitude of those whom you shall assist, and a great accession of strength for yourselves. You may search all history without finding many instances of a people gaining all these advantages at once, or many instances of a power that comes in quest of assistance being in a position to give to the people whose alliance she solicits as much safety and honor as she will receive. But it will be urged that it is only in the case of a war that we shall be found useful. To this we answer that if any of you imagine that the war is far off, he is grievously mistaken, and is blind to the fact that the Spartans, out of fear of you want war, and that Corinth is influential with them. The same, remember, that is your enemy, and is even now trying to subdue you as a preliminary to attacking you. And this she does to prevent our becoming united by a common enmity, and her having us both on her hands, and also to ensure getting the jump on you in one of two ways, either by crippling your power or by making its strength her own. Now it is our policy to preempt her, that is, for Corcyra to make an offer of alliance and for you to accept it. In fact, we ought to form plans against her instead of waiting to defeat the plans she forms against us. 1.34. If she asserts that for you to receive a colony of hers into alliance that is not right, let her know that every colony that is well treated honors its parent state, but becomes estranged from it by injustice. For colonists are not sent forth on the understanding that they are to be slaves of those that remain behind, but they are to be their equals. And that Corinth was injuring us is clear. Invited to refer the dispute about Epidamus to arbitration, they chose to prosecute their complaints by war rather than by fair trial. And let their conduct toward us who are their kindred be a warning to you not to be misled by their deceit, nor to yield to their direct request. Concessions to adversaries only end in self reproach, and the more strictly they are avoided, the greater will be the chance of security. And 1.35. I'm wondering if the same person did all this talking or different people and they sort of tagged off. If it be urged that your reception of us will be a breach of the treaty existing between you and Sparta, the answer is that we are a neutral state. Okay. And that one of the express provisions of that treaty is that it shall be open to any Hellenic state that is neutral to join whichever side it pleases. It is intolerable for Corinth to be allowed to obtain men for her navy not only from our allies, but also from the rest of Hellas, no small number being furnished by your own subjects, while we are to be excluded both from the alliance left open to us by treaty and from any assistance that we might get from other quarters, and you are to be accused of political immorality if you comply with our request. On the other hand, we shall have much greater cause to complain of you if you do not comply with it. If we who are in peril and are no enemies of yours meet with a repulse at your hands, while Corinth, who is the aggressor and your enemy, not only meets with no hindrance from you, but is even allowed to draw material for war from your dependencies. This ought not to be, but you should either forbid her enlisting men in your dominions, or you should lend us to what help you may think advisable. That sounds not quite vaguely like you should join us or suffer. Uh, but okay. Uh, where are we at? 1.36? Okay. But your real policy is to afford us open approval and support. The advantages of this course, as we premised in the beginning of our speech, are many. We mentioned one that is perhaps the chief. Could there be a clearer guarantee of our good faith than is offered by the fact that the power which is at enmity with you is also at enmity with us, and that power is fully able to punish defection? And there is a wide difference between declining the alliance of an inland and of a maritime power. For your first endeavor should be to prevent, if possible, the existence of any naval power except your own. Failing this, to secure the friendship of the strongest that does exist, which, of course, they're implying themselves, the Corcyraeans. And so 1.36 goes on. And I think yeah, I think we'll end at the end of this paragraph. And if any of you believe that what we urge is expedient, but fear to act upon this belief, lest it should lead to a breach of the treaty, you must remember that on the one hand, Whatever your fears, your strength will be formidable to your antagonist. On the other, whatever the confidence you derive from refusing to receive us, you will be the weaker and less terrifying to a strengthened enemy. You must also remember that your decision is for Athens no less than for Corcyra, and that you are not making the best provision for her interest if, at a time when you are anxiously scanning the horizons that you may be in readiness for the breaking out of the war which is all but upon you, you hesitate to attach to your side a place whose adhesion or estrangement is alike pregnant with the most vital consequences. For it lies conveniently for the coast navigation in the direction of Italy and Sicily, being able to bar the passage of naval reinforcements from there to the Peloponnesus, and from the Peloponnesus to there, and it is in other respects most suitably positioned. To sum up as shortly as possible, embracing both general and particular considerations, let this show you the folly of sacrificing us. Remember that there are but three considerable naval powers in Hellas: Athens, Corcyra, and Corinth, and that if you allow two of these three to become one, and Corinth to secure us for herself, you will have to hold the sea against the united fleets of Corcyra and the Peloponnesus. But if you receive us, you will have our ships to reinforce you in the struggle. Well, that is one heck of a speech. That is a heck of a. It's one part asking, but one part declaration with thinly veiled threat. And I gotta say, I don't know who their speechwriter is, or if they just said this off the cuff, but it was actually pretty good. All right, so that was that. We now know where the Corcyraeans stand in Athens as they try to get the Athenians on board with them. By hook and apparently, not quite yet by crook, but they're implying it. So next time, we'll start with this sentence here that separates 1.36 from 1.37, which is such were the words of the Corcyraeans. After they had finished, the Corinthians spoke as follows. So we'll pick up with 1.37 the next time, and we'll get the Corinthian speech. And I gotta say, I hope it's as good as the Corcyraeans because I really like that. I love that. Not too sure about the kind of the veiled threat, but overall, that was a really good speech. It was one part comic book, one part Shakespeare, um, one part braggadocio, and another part trying vaguely to cover up the fact that they're afraid. I think that was really good. We're still very early in the landmark Thucydides. I love this book, though. I am loving it. I am so glad my ancient Greek instructor recommended this book to me and that I'm reading it to you. I hope you're reading along with it. I hope you grab a copy. Again, I'm not reading ahead. It's my first time reading all this with all of you. If you have anything you want to say about it, let me know. Please like and subscribe. And I will catch you all next time where we jump on paragraph 1.37 and see what the Corinthians have to say about all this. And then hopefully, what does Athens do? I can't wait to find out. I hope you all stay safe out there, and I will see you later.